Welcome to the Data Swamp. I'm your host, as always, Justin Small, joined by my co-host, Wayne Cantwell. Wayne, how you doing?
Very good, thanks. Good morning. How's it going?
I'm doing good. Sounds like we had some feedback from last time. We had an awesome discussion last time about, problems that people have with their data. So, I'm looking forward to hearing some feedback on that. It sounds like it would have been helpful for some people, and also got some feedback about feedback in the mic, some background noises, some stuff, a little bit too long of a sponsor intro. So just to let you guys know, our listeners, we fixed all that for y'all. So this will be real smooth, real crisp, nice sponsor intro. We got some headphones rocking, so I'm excited for this one.
Very good. I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. So we'll go ahead and kick off without further ado with a word from our sponsors, and then we'll dive into today's topic, how to build insights out of analyzing data. So let's kick off with a sponsor intro. All right, Tesh Global is our sponsor, and Tesh Global is a data management professional services firm with focused expertise on the most challenging, ugly problems in modern data integration, enterprise analytics, and software development. We have extensive experience in the areas of enterprise integration, enterprise business intelligence and analytics, and software application development in a variety of industries. Healthcare, manufacturing, supply chain, retail, insurance, you name it, we do it. And Tesh Global is headquartered in Grafton, Wisconsin. We have offices in Boise, Idaho, Mexico City, Mexico, and Amsterdam, Netherlands. For more information, visit www.teshglobal.com. That might have been one too many W's, so I'll say it again, www.teshglobal.com for more information. And just to recap a little bit about last week's topic, we were discussing problems organizations have with their data. We talked about data quality as being one of the main ones. We also talked about the variety of different data that people are ingesting and seeing as being a big one. And then we encourage companies to become data-driven in their mindset, to turn to people with technical expertise in order to help them drive their businesses for more insight, and to really to treat data as an asset that's managed, that's treated seriously, and isn't just an afterthought. Stimulating conversation from last week, and I'm looking to another stimulating conversation this week, analyzing data for insight. Wayne, this is one of those topics where really the business, the business is wanting always to use data to kind of support their decisions and drive their actions, right? So it's almost, I would almost call it like a blueprint, right? Trying to treat data as the blueprint for their business here, and use it to derive those insights that'll be very valuable, right?
Absolutely. Business intelligence has been coined quite a while ago, and although it seems as if it's a new term, it's been out for decades. And the thing about business intelligence, it really is a marker for business to keep their eyes on. And the old KPI, key performance indicators, are really easily gained with some of the new technology that we have, along with the loads and loads of data that's available now. So when you combine all the data that's out there, because we've got so many points of collection that are new, we're collecting a lot more data than ever before. And that means that data can be turned into information and ultimately into insights for business to drive their decision making. So this is a great topic to dig into. And like most of them with data, there's a few layers to it. So as we peel that onion back, we'll see the good, bad, and ugly of what we call business intelligence and insights into your data.
Absolutely. Always looking out for the ugly things here in the data swamp. So
Yeah, that's what we specialize in, right? And not from a bad perspective or a negative perspective. It's really something that, if you really hone in on some of the things that are causing pain points for your business, uh, usually you can find those in the data. Sometimes they're not easily gleaned because there's relationships out there in the data that skew things or may veer you off the path of what's actually happening. But if you continue to dig and you continue to peel that onion back, you're going to find those layers will reveal some insights that will make you make some different decisions than what you've been doing, and ultimately that can help you and turn into a positive thing ultimately for your business. So don't be afraid of finding bad data. I think it's actually a good thing. Most companies look at bad data and go, boy, look at this. Well, I've been in situations and on projects where once that data is corrected, it actually gives you insight to your data that is helpful. So it's a good thing to find bad data.
Sure. One of the best quotes I've heard about this actually was written by a guy, a Scottish writer named Andrew Lang, and he wrote it in 1910. So think about that. We've been talking about stuff like this since 1910, over 100 years. And the quote is, he uses statistics as a drunken man uses lampposts for support rather than illumination. Right? So decades later, it really seems like a lot of our businesses are doing the same thing, right? Using data just to support rather than drive their decisions, right? And so what we need to talk about are, finding and figuring out what we want from our data and figuring out how to find value out of the data, and to really talk about the questions we need to be asking ourselves regarding, the context, the need, the vision, the outcome of our data, and figuring out what framework we have for turning that data into meaningful stories and business success.
Yes. I think that's actually so appropriate because so many people use the term data driven, but my question is, as you well know, I like to flip things around. What if you've got bad data and you're driving your business with bad data?
Right.
That becomes a problem. So there is some clarity that needs to be defined when you're talking about, how do you have a properly data-driven business? And that requires a little bit of insight on the actual owners of the business to look at their business from a vision perspective, right? What's the vision for this company? And then trying to align the data so that it supports that. And it's very appropriate, for the quote. It's really a marker and a guidepost, if you will, rather than the light itself, right? It kind of guides you to where you need to go rather than says, here's exactly what you need to do. It's really a great analogy to use business intelligence and the data that you have more of a buoy, right? As you're floating in the water is a lot more valuable.
Sure. I think, that's really, really helpful insights. Value, like you said, data is really only valuable if it helps a company make better decisions, right? You could be sitting on the biggest data pile in the world, but if you don't have a means to translate it into insights, or if it's all, bad data, you don't want to use it to drive your business. So, hey, Wayne, I think with some of those insights in mind, what are some steps you think people can take to start molding their data into actionable insights in terms of just defining the data?
It all starts at how you actually collect data, right? So what happens is over time, the data that you collect as a business or a company or a corporation trying to achieve your goals, you collect data from different sources. And as an example, Internally, your company has operations, so there's operational data, day-to-day things that your company does to achieve its goals. So that's one source of data. The other sources actually come from outside of your company, and those sources come in so many different variations and formats and styles that uh, it's best if you're able to be scalable and flexible in order to ingest those data sources. So, one of the biggest parts of, any data intelligence that you're trying to glean from your data is actually the whole processing of how you get data into your organization, how you cleanse it, how you stage it, and then ultimately report off of that data so that you can find out, what is good, bad, or ugly about the data and in turn with your business, right? So these are some of the things that if you were to look at every business, they have these components. There's ingesting the data, there's processing the data, cleansing it, and then there's actually gaining insight from it. And so, because the insights come last, some folks don't look at it as a holistic approach. And that's unfortunate because if you were to look at it from a holistic approach, it would allow that last component, your visualizations, your reporting, the distribution of those reports would actually happen a lot more efficiently if you start to prepare your data from ingestion all the way to insight. So it's very important to understand those components of your data and kind of the life cycle of data.
Sure. I think everything you're saying really has a lot of helpful nuggets in there about how to treat your data well. I'm wondering also, say you are treating your data well, or say you're trying to figure out how to solve a different problem, not one that says, how do I trust my data, but more one that says, how do I figure out what I want from my data? How do I find where the value is in my data? How do you think people could go about doing that?
That's also a great part of understanding data is everybody interprets it differently because they all
Mm-hmm.
have different verticals that they're servicing. So if you were in a company and you wanted to understand your customers better, a lot of that data belongs to the customer and you ingest it in the form of online forms being filled out, applications for their information being filled out um, because they're requesting data from your company, right? So
Right.
uh, the human resource folks and people who are actually dealing with the personal element, if you will, of businesses, they view the data a lot differently than, let's say, someone in sales, right?
Yeah,
um,
I almost think it's almost like every person who's working with data has their own data story. I kind of think about it in that way, right? And it seems like every story has these four parts of a plot, right? Like an exposition, some kind of conflict, a resolution, and then hopefully at the end, the happily ever after ending, you know? And it's it's fascinating to me to sort of follow people through that story, right? Like, well, okay, the exposition, that's like, what context are they coming from? What are they trying to achieve? And then the conflict is kind of that need, right? What are they trying to address by using the data? And then that resolution there is kind of I guess the vision for it. Like what's it going to look like to meet that need with the data, and then that outcome or that happily ever after ending, right, would be, in the end, how is the success of the project being measured, right? And hopefully it's a happily ever after ending, right?
Yeah, there's always a different twist and turn when you're dealing with data projects,
Right,
because you're absolutely right. Everyone's got a different story, right?
right,
So everyone treats that data a little bit differently. So although there's the concept of one source of truth, um, it always gets frayed off into different compartments of that truth, right? So,
Sure.
although it's the same source of data, it is looked at differently. A great example is, did a project with a utilities company, and that utilities company serviced up water, gas, electricity, and solar.
Mm,
Okay. And so, from a company perspective, you may want to look at your data from a customer perspective. So, customer A could have, two of your four services that I just mentioned, right? So, let's say if they have gas and water, then they have a gas and water bill. And so now you know the value of that customer if you're looking at it from a customer paradigm, right? And
right.
that's great. So now you've got one story that you're telling. But the company may also want to market to that individual. And so you've got to know that there's two services that they don't have. And so those are some insights that can only be gleaned if you start to dissect the data and look at it a little bit differently. So, the folks who are in solar may not have heard of this customer at all, right? So, from their perspective, that department is not going to know customer A. And so these are some very distinct views of the data that have to be understood before you actually start reporting and trying to gain insight from it, is understanding the data as a whole and dissecting it in terms of each vertical within your company or each department within your company has different needs, and that's a reality, and that's not going to change. Everyone looks at the data a little bit differently, and so you've got to account for that first. Once that's accounted for, then you can start to dig in a little bit deeper and start to build everyone's story as you described. And
Right.
that story always has, similar to what I spoke about earlier, a beginning, a middle, and an end. The beginning would be ingesting that data, the middle is processing that data, and the end is actually seeing that data make some sense to you at a summary level. So you can say, you know what, wow, these customers have this pattern, or this utility has this pattern. So these are things that you ultimately try to get to when you're analyzing data. And I got to tell you, one of the big things that's happening now, because there's so much data, AI, artificial intelligence, is playing a huge role in that arena. So once you have your framework set up and you've got data coming in and ingesting it properly, a lot of folks are turning to AI now, which has a component of machine learning where it learns these patterns. And I think that's going to be a big direction that's going to take place in the future here. And it's another one of those things I'm really excited about digging into from a technical perspective, because I think there's so much value to be gained.
Yeah, I would love to talk with. We've been talking to this company called Elation. They build a data catalog that really uses machine learning to surface the usage of data and to drive people's data literacy. That's really interesting to me. I've thought about what a cool idea that would be before, but to see a product out there that's actually uh, using machine learning to kind of approach something as complex and kind of, you know, uh, in some ways intractable as data literacy, which really belongs in the business domain, and making that accessible for people. I think that's a really big deal, and I think we're just only going to see more and more of that.
Well, I'll be honest with you. We all use machine learning every day. We all use AI every day. And it's what makes one of the biggest companies in the world the biggest company in the world, and that's Google, right? So,
Yeah,
when you go out there and do your searches, um, uh, in the background, there's a whole bunch of little bots that actually interpret everything that you enter into that little bitty form field, right? The most popular website in the world has one form field, right? It's your search, it's Google.
Mm-hmm.
And it is literally taking that one entry form field, and it is doing some very heavy lifting on the back end with machine learning. So, it's interesting. You can do tests on this. If you were to do a search, you yourself from a certain city, and do that same search from another city, you'd be getting different results. And it also would be different results if you're on your mobile device or if you're on your actual laptop. And all of this is attributed to machine learning, and it's a matter of processing lots and lots of data. So I think we're on the verge of, as you said, seeing more and more of this. This stuff is really going to be prevalent. And subtly, it already is, right? Very subtly, it's already in our lives in the form of Google and almost any other search engine you use out there, YouTube, you name it, Amazon. They all have this element of, really crunching the data to give the better customer experience that they're looking for to all their clients.
Sure. So kind of pivoting a topic, and I think sort of trying to build off of where we started. So we talked about defining data that we want to analyze for insights, right? And really looking at incoming data sources, how we ingest those, having scalability in mind. Also looking at, who owns the data, cleaning the data with business rules, right? And then preparing the data for consumption by business users or customers, right? I kind of want to pivot now to talk about the framework for that, right? Because I think we were talking a little bit about data stories and telling meaningful stories with data. But, there's this process that happens where people are looking for the right story to tell. If you think about architecture, I think that's kind of inspiring to me because they have to deal with these very abstract design requests, right? These things that are very, just living in someone's head, and they have to make that a reality, right? And in the same way, companies need to transform data, which is abstract in a way as well, into something that's actionable and an insight, right? And when you're understanding and visualizing data, it's similar to the way that I think an architect is going around and sketching his building in the concept stage, right? He's making a bunch of different charts and graphs and tables. A data analyst is doing that, right? That's kind of like having a conversation with data, right? It helps the person get kind of acquainted with figures, sort of to find interesting insights, right?
Yeah, what's interesting about the whole data topic is that, so often we try to make data conform to what we want it to be. And it's sort of like the same way in life. There's certain plans that we make and certain things that we plot out, and we find out that, it didn't quite work out the way we anticipated it. And that's exactly what data is. Data is folks putting relationships, that's why we call it relational tables, right?
Mm-hmm.
We try to relate data to each other so that it makes sense to us, individuals,
Right.
business people, and people using the data to make decisions. And oftentimes, and I think what's awesome about, some of the computing power that we have nowadays and some of the direction that a lot of it's taken is that you have to allow the data to tell you what it's going to tell you, despite what you may predict, despite what you may kind of plan for. We're finding out that a lot of these, predictive analytics and all of these sort of things, often, yes, they do follow a pattern. But there's often times where you're going to get, some anomalies, and those anomalies can literally change the business world. And so these are things that you really can't plan for, but it's also so important to keep a data structure and keep a data story going so that you can make some sense of the data, because it's really hard for business, um, uh, whether you be an owner or a manager in business, in order to make decisions, you've got to make informed decisions. So that information for your informed decision normally comes in the form of data and you defining the relationships. So although you may not be able to predict what's going to happen or how data will turn out, it's very important to structure your data, and building the framework for your data has a lot to do with your vision for your company. And so as you start to build this vision, as you start to build these relationships, all of a sudden things start to come together, and then you can start actually making sense of a lot of the data that you're processing. And I say all that to say this: keep in mind there's going to be some unknown unknowns, right?
Oh
And
yeah,
so these are the things that businesses rarely account for. But if you do,
those chaos
um,
monkeys.
yes, yes. And the point I make is that it's good to be flexible and understanding of these things, because if you're able to handle them and process them and allow for these data anomalies that happen, now you have a truly scalable system that doesn't break when anomalies happen. It just bends.
Sure. Yeah, I really think what um, there's two aspects there, right? For the data engineer who's building something, there's the ability to build a system that's flexible and can account for data anomalies which occur. For the analyst, right? There's this aspect of it that really I would say is called doing your data homework, right? Um, and that step, could start with a pen and paper. It probably will evolve as you sort of dig into the data and your analysis and visualization software. And you need to start doing things like filtering the data, right? Cutting the noise and focusing on the most interesting topic in there, right? Or sorting the data, right? Ranking it by importance, or grouping, segmenting it out, right? To summarize data and segment different groups, or just visualizing data, right? Bringing intuitive visuals out, and doing that preparation that's required. Just kind of going back to the architect analogy, like an architect goes between 2D sketches with their pen and paper and 3D plans, right? A sketch could be appropriate and valid in and of itself, but it only really comes to life when it's actually built, right? And in the data world, the same thing happens when we're crunching numbers. Sometimes it's too imprecise, or our visualization or our analysis is formatted incorrectly, or it's incomplete. And that's where the importance of constantly validating your homework, right, with the actual data comes into play.
Yeah, I think again, you're hitting on some good topics in terms of it's a changing, evolving story, right? So
Right.
once you write this data story and you have a vision and you have a plan and the book's all written out, it's very important to continue to hone the data, continue to filter the data precisely, because the KPIs that were used yesterday may not be used tomorrow, right? So there's different things that you're looking for. And when you've got so many ingestion points of data as we do today, B2B, B2C, C2C, there's so many types of data that comes into your system. And so it's very important to continually be updated on not only just the processing, but the methodology on how to bring that data from, bits and bytes into information. How do you actually turn that into insight? And so one of the key components in doing that is to continually update, upgrade, and improve your systems. So that's why scalability is so important in any data system, and having that ability to scale, to grow as your business grows.
Sure. I think that's great. So I think just one last topic in here, right? We've talked about defining the data, what it takes to really look at the data you already have to build that data story, right? And to have your story written, your best laid plans. And then there's the visualization part, right? Which I think is really when data comes to life, right? So, Wayne, what do you think are some principles or some guidelines that can help people create visualizations from data that really lead to compelling insights?
Well, it all goes back to fundamentals, the 80-20 rule, right? You're going to find that in order to find the 80-20, it's a lot more visible if it's seen on a chart, right? If you got two bars on a chart and one says 20, one says 80, it's very easy to see that. If you're looking at that same report in a tabular format with lists and columns, you got two columns that you're looking at. It's a little bit better, and I would say more readily and easy to interpret if you've got it in a graph, a chart.
Right.
These are things that really resonate, across the board. You don't have to be a data analyst. You don't have to necessarily be a data scientist to see when things are skewed, right? When you see things that are a little offline, you can immediately gravitate towards that anomaly and address it. And so visualization is one of the biggest components of, business intelligence and analyzing data, that's really gaining so much more traction because we have so much data, because the volume of data is increasing. I've never, met a CEO who wants to look at, 5,000 records, let alone the millions and billions of rows that's in the database, right?
Sure.
And so you really want to highlight the distinctions, the anomalies. And so one of the key components of any visualization, application that you're building, make sure you're finding those key anomalies. Make sure you're addressing what the business is looking for, and use sort of the car gauge, right? You want to just take a quick glance and see that we're out of gas, right? We're low on oil.
Right.
We're going too fast. um,
Right.
these are all things that should be easily visible to you and easily readable. That's why everyone talks about dashboards, right? Everybody talks about, we need some dashboards. We need the CEO to be able to see immediately. We need the salespeople to see immediately. We need marketing to know. So I think those are key components in anybody's business intelligence portfolio, is to make sure you've got some very straightforward KPIs that are visually appealing, right? And so
Sure.
those are some of the key components, and there's tons more. That's one of my sweet spots in terms of, I love doing that kind of stuff and building those types of applications, because when you show people things that are happening within their own business that they've never seen before, it allows them to really scale their business to a level that they never thought could happen, based on some very simple paradigms that you're exposing to them. And I think that's a great value that business intelligence brings to the business world.
Sure. Yeah, it sounds like succinctly, it's really, focusing on trends, not data points, right? And then also, like you said too, be aesthetically mindful, right? If the visualization you create needs to tell a story, and it needs to do it in a way that's compelling. You don't want it to be that book that you read that you stop after the first chapter because it's just written so poorly, right? You want it to be beautiful, right? And you want to make a chart be pretty for someone to look at, or a dashboard pretty for someone to look at, and you want to show to them the trend of what's happening and show to them the relationship between their data, right? What is it that you've discovered that you can help them discover now also in your data analysis in terms of relationships between variables, or correlation and dependence of certain statistics on other variables, right? That some highly trained statistician would be able to parse out, but someone in the business may have a little bit more trouble parsing out. How can you convey that to them in a way that's easy to understand, right? Because one person can't see everything, right? It takes a whole bunch of people who are diving into the data and several pairs of eyes looking at the data in order to have actionable insights. And we can't leave that in the hands of just a few statisticians who are at a company, right?
Yeah, it's very akin to marketing. What you really want to do when it comes to effective visualizations is you want to excite people, right?
Mm-hmm.
You want to highlight the colors that are meaningful, and then you've got to connect, right? You've got to have something meaningful. Depending on the business or vertical that you're in, you want to make sure you're showing them exactly what's relevant to their business. And then what I like to call proof positive, right? You can absolutely positively prove that here is the trend, right? And here's what's not trending. Here's what's not happening. And then you convert that into information, right? You've got to say, all right, now that we see this big spike on the chart, let's drill in there. Let's see what makes up that big spike. Why have sales gone up, in this quarter, in this month, in these 3 days, right? And that's really part of the whole psychology about using graphs and charts, is that the mind is automatically drawn towards curiosity and intrigue. And so in order to fulfill it, you've got to be able to drill deeper and deeper. And at the end, your mind needs to be satisfied with the numbers that it drilled into and received from this great graph, right? Because behind that picture, again, it's what we talked about earlier, the story, right? So that picture is what pulls you in, and then you start digging in and you search and you finally get to the end of the story, and you read a good book. You finished a good book, right?
Right.
And that's because the story is complete, and it either corroborated with your thinking or it gave you a surprise, and now you're enlightened with some new information that explains why the story went the way it went.
Sure. And if you are surprised, it's always helpful to be able to be skeptical, right? To look at data from a couple of different angles. Maybe you would want to look at the same data a bunch of different times with different kinds of charts, right? Because data has the power to mislead you, right? So you want to make sure that it's telling the story accurately, right? And then also comparing, time ranges, right? If you look at a week over week or month over month or summer over summer, not every time range is comparable. And if you compare, maybe April through March, right, that could pose problems if the number of days are different in each month, right? So there are definitely, like you said, things that come to the surface that could be surprising, and definitely value in being skeptical about those things. And then if the data can be, like you said, proved positive, right? There's a positive proof of the discovery that was gleaned by the story, then you take a different perspective, right? And data has the power to help people do that in a way very little else can, right?
Absolutely, and that's the beauty of it, is it may surprise you, it may shock you, But the data is the data. It is what it is, and learning to kind of accept that data and then making the best of it is always the positive approach, and allows you to be scalable and flexible so that you're able to change and do things with your business that you may have not anticipated doing. You may have not, thought about going down that road. But if you look at any of the major businesses out there, most of them have never started off in the direction that they're going now. I mean, it's incredible. Google wasn't always just Google. Facebook, it wasn't always just Facebook. Instagram,
Sure.
all of these companies started off as something else, but because of the data, the feedback that data gives you, they morph into a different direction, and all of those companies have become very successful by using the data,
Sure.
understanding, that data. So it's really good stuff, and I think this stuff is only going to grow, and that's why it's so important for people to understand what data can do for you.
Great. Well, thanks, Wayne, for stimulating conversation. I think we're out of time now, but uh, just to recap, unearthing gems in your data can take a little bit of work, but I hope that the framework and some of the things we discussed here will help you be able to get insights out of your data, and it might even inspire you to build the best story, the best data story, right? That can help propel your business, right? No set of principles or rules will work every single time. So it's up to you guys to look at what the best technique is for you to construct your data analysis. But turning data into insights is, even though it's an unstructured, sometimes messy process, is fortunately a process that there's a lot of material out there on. There are a lot of guidelines out there on, and you can be that architect going from a simple drawing and blueprint to one where there's a full story that you can tell about your business via the data. So again, this has been the Data Swamp. Really appreciate you guys for tuning in, and we will be back next week.